Hello. Welcome to the Mr.G podcast. I am Mr.G, Gregory Brandt. I am coming to you from the outskirts of Chinatown in Honolulu, Hawaii. Today is January 10th, Tuesday. Feels like Wednesday. It might be Wednesday, January 10th, 2024. My motto, my quote this year, I should say, is don't complain, don't explain. And that goes for everybody, wherever you are in life. Don't complain and don't explain. Whatever is going on in your life, don't complain about it. And whatever you're doing, don't explain it, just do it. And that goes for this podcast as well. I've been switching off one podcast, I'll talk about sports, the other podcast, I'll talk about something else, something more universal about life. I think the last podcast, it wasn't about sports, it was about the universe and our place in the universe, and a particular Brian Cox quote, the astrophysicist that I read. Today, on today's episode, the 20-minute episode, we'll do half and half. I'll talk about basketball and the NBA All-Star voting for 10 minutes. And then I'm going to talk about the US election voting for 10 minutes. All right. So getting on to it, without looking at any charts or anything like that, which I did not pull up. I did somewhat research. I wrote down some topics to talk about today. Sometimes during this podcast, I will just go for 20 minutes and just speak for 20 minutes. Most people cannot do that. I'm taking a skill. I'm also explaining, which I don't want to do. But that's one reason why I enjoy this podcast. Doing this podcast is because it comes naturally to me. And today I wrote down a list about a few different topics, which plenty of things to talk about for the next 20 minutes. I did not, however, have a tablet or something else to look at as the current All-Star voting. So if you like basketball, NBA basketball, you can vote for the NBA All-Stars as well. The next round of voting starts tomorrow, January 11th. So pick your favorite teams, pick your favorite players on your favorite teams, or try to be as fair as possible if you're a true enthusiast of NBA. And I've watched the NBA this year more than I have in many other years. So I feel in a fitting position to judge on who I thinks deserves to be the All Stars. All right, so let's start with the Eastern Conference. That's the easiest one. You have Milwaukee Bucks, Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek Freak. He's averaging like most great big men in the NBA today, is averaging almost around 30 points a game, around 10 rebounds, around 7 or more assists. And so Giannis and Joel Embiid are automatic picks in the Eastern Conference. Joel Embiid for the Philadelphia 76ers. And then you have Damian Lillard, I would say. He's one of the most popular players in the NBA. This is his first year with Milwaukee. Uh, Tyrese Halliburton as well. He has, I believe, led the league in assists this year. Once again, I'm not looking at any stats or paper. He recently got injured, so but I think it's fitting to announce him as a starter for the All-Star for, even though he'll be replaced by an injury player. So that's 4 out of the 5. Who am I? And number 5, I got to throw in my favorite player, one of my favorite players, Jimmy Butler. Miami has played above expectations as usual. And there you go. I left out the Celtics in the starting 5, right? We got Giannis, we got Joel Embiid, we got Damian Lillard, and Jimmy Butler. Is that 4? Did I just name 4? Giannis, Joel Embiid, Damian Lillard, and Tyrese Halliburton. So that's 5. And I left out the number 1 team in the Eastern Conference as far as record goes, the Boston Celtics. I guess that kind of tells you how I feel about the Boston Celtics. So we're going to have 7 starters in the Eastern Conference. Why? Because it's my podcast. It's the Mr. G Hawaii podcast. So we're having 7 starters because it's easier. And I picked 2 out of the Celtics because they have the best record. I'm not going to pick Brown because I dislike him more than I dislike Jason Strange Smile Tatum. And also, and who am I to talk about a strange smile? I'm sorry, that's the one that means thing. You got a strange smile. I shouldn't have said that. Why did I say that? I'm sorry, Jason Tatum. I don't know why I dislike him, but every time I see a bag of chips and I see his face on it, I don't know. I guess it's just the Celtics. I'm not a Celtics fan for whatever reason. I don't like their colors. I don't like their attitude. I don't like their fans. But picking two players, Kristaps Porzingis has helped the Boston Celtics achieve the #1 record in the Eastern Conference. And you do, it's historic to reward the teams that are playing very well. After the Detroit Pistons upset the Lakers all the way back in 2005, I believe. The next year, I believe four out of the five or maybe all five starters for the Eastern Conference were the Detroit Pistons that won the championship the previous year. Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, Ben Wallace, Rasheed Wallace, and Tayshaun Prince. And so they do reward that, and that is fitting. You don't reward individual stats. It has changed over the LeBron era, where it seems like stats are more important and stats have more say so nowadays than they did as far as the best team. So those are my picks for the Eastern Conference. I picked 7 All Stars. The Western Conference, it's really it's hard because so many players are left out, including in the East and in the West. But I picked 7 in the East there. Now in the West, okay, you got to say the top teams are Minnesota and Oklahoma City. So they each deserves a player without saying anything else. And then LeBron James gets the most votes of any player in the Western Conference, but I'm not putting him in my top 5. All right, because they have an under 500 record. The Clippers have 4 former MVP candidates, and Kawhi Leonard is deserving of a starting All-Star nod. I think I saw his stats for like the last 12 games, and he averaged like a crazy amount. He's been playing so well, and so is James Harden. So if you wanted to really be legit about it, and if they keep winning up until the All-Star break, I think James Harden, despite the Western Conference being full of All-Stars, once again, as it always seems to be for the last 30, 40 years I've been watching basketball, the Western Conference is much more stronger than the Eastern Conference. So one thing about the LeBron era All-Star game, when it wasn't East versus West and the players got to choose the different players, is you normally have way more All-Stars in the West. But with that being said, the Clippers are one of my favorite teams, and I actually picked them to win the championship this year, early before the season started. So I would award their top 2 players, and then you also have Paul George and Russell Westbrook coming off the bench. But 2 out of the 3 starters, with I would say James Harden deserves a starting nod, and Kawhi Leonard even more so. Now the NBA champions, the reigning NBA champion Denver Nuggets. You got to give the Joker a starting nod. He's been playing crazy. He's almost averaging a triple double. He's the MVP in the league right now, if you base it on statistics. And he had a crazy buzzer beater where he hit a 3-pointer, and he shoots it so strangely. I talked previously about how Jokic catches the ball at he catches it at the top of his head, which makes it really hard to guard. When he gets the ball, then he can just put it in the rim before the defender can do anything. And his form, he literally shoots it from, and you'll see like kids or amateurs doing that. You rarely see a professional athlete shoot a 3-point shot from behind the head like that. But Jokic does that, and he had one of the best buzzer beaters I've ever seen the other night. So that's 3 of my starters in the West. I got 2 Clippers, and you can say I'm being biased, but hey, they're all-star voting. But I'm not being that biased because James Harden playing awesome. He's leading the Clippers to one of the best records in the Western Conference, and they have so much experience on that team. They're the team you do not want to see in a 7-game series in the NBA playoffs. Who would win in a 7-game series, the Clippers or the Suns? Oh, okay. Which has better chemistry? Which team has more experience? You know. Oh, the Suns have a top big 3 with Booker, Durant, and Bradley Beal. Okay, yeah, sure they do. No, the Clippers have Bradley Beal has never been an MVP candidate. Bradley Beal has never been a Finals MVP. So The Clippers, the Nuggets, and then I mentioned Minnesota and OKC are the two best teams in the Western Conference, and I'd say SGA Shea Gilchrist Alexander deserves a starting nod, but then you're like looking at so in my starting five, I'm not going to explain. Don't complain. Don't explain. All right, but yeah, you know who I left off? Steph Curry. You know why? Because their team's not have a good record. You know, I left off LeBron James. You know why? Because their team doesn't have a good record. You know, I left off AD because their team does not have a good record. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, so I'd say Minnesota and gets a player in. So I'd say Minnesota, not Rudy Gobert, not Carl Anthony Towns, but Ant. So those are my All-Star vote five for the Western Conference. I have who am I left leaving out? But I got 4 out of 5. I'm not so sure about Ant, but 4 out of 5. Kawhi Leonard. Uh, why did I all of a sudden go blank here? You know, something must have came into the room. Some energy must have came into the room. Gingerbread coffee, it's so delicious. Jokic for Denver Nuggets deserves a starting nine. Oh, Luka Doncic from the Dallas Mavericks. He's incredible. He's the best player in the NBA. Luka Doncic and Jokic are the two best. Joker are the two best players in the NBA. So my starting five in the West, I have Luka Doncic, Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, um, Shea Gilchrist Alexander, and Luka Doncic, Joker, Shea Gilchrist Alexander. I don't know why I just drew a blank. Shea Gilchrist Alexander, Jokic. No, it's not a big deal. We'll move on. Those are my all-star votes. All right. Now with the election. Okay. So you cannot minimize it when you're recording this meeting. Go ahead. So with the election results. All right, the Western Conference. These are the leading vote getters right now. LeBron James is leading in the Western Conference with 2 million votes. Kevin Durant is second with 1.8 million. I wouldn't put them either in my starting five. All right. Yeah, I did it good. I mean, yeah, my starting five is good. I didn't put Steph Curry in my starting five. In the Western Conference, I got Luka Doncic, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, and Nikolai Jokic, Joker. That's my starting five in the West. My starting five in the Eastern Conference, I have Giannis, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Halliburton, Jimmy Butler. That's 4 out of 5. And I previously said Damian Lillard, but instead we'll go with Jason Tatum. So Jason Tatum, Jimmy Butler, Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Tyrese Halliburton. Those are my starting five in the Eastern Conference. All right. Now, other types of voting. If you want to vote, but as far as the NBA All-Star voting is happening right now. You can vote in many different ways. And, if you're hearing this, vote for your All-Stars. And I'm curious, who are you voting for? Send them to me on Twitter. Now, for another type of voting, the 2024 U.S. presidential election voting. The best way to get information about the presidential election, it's not from the mainstream legacy media. It's not from Twitter or TikTok. The best way is to find the real facts about who's leading in the 2024 presidential election. You follow the money. So you go to Las Vegas. What are the betting odds, right? I remember in 2016 when Donald Trump upset Hillary Clinton, the New York Times was saying some crazy number like Hillary Clinton had a 91% chance to win or something like that. And I couldn't believe it because, it's Donald Trump was selling out stadiums and Hillary Clinton couldn't fill up a high school gymnasium. And so I looked into it. And I looked into Vegas, and Vegas had Hillary as a slight favorite, but not as a huge favorite as one would believe. And so that night, was the first presidential election I did not vote in 2016. They wouldn't let me vote because I didn't have a place of residency. The address that I used was an address to receive mail, but it wasn't a home or a physical address. So they did not let me vote in the 2016 election. It was the first presidential election that I had not voted in, that I was legally of age to vote. So I knew Donald Trump had a chance though, because you follow the money. It's and Vegas wasn't built on losers, right? So if you want to know the facts, you can bet on any presidential election in Las Vegas. You can bet on just about anything, Oscars, sports, of course. But let's get into it. The 2024 presidential election. Who is the favorite? Guess. Donald Trump is the favorite with 5-4 odds. 5-4 odds means that you have to, if you put down $4, you win $5. So he's the favorite, but he's not a huge favorite. Up next, we have Joe Biden, who's 9-4 odds. So if you bet $4, you win $9 with Joe Biden. Then on third place is Nikki Haley with 13-2 odds. So you bet $2, you win $13 if Nikki Haley becomes the first woman president. I pray that she doesn't. Fourth up, Gavin Newsom, who's 10-1 odds. And that seems kind of odd, you know. I don't I mean that seems kind of odd. Pun not intended. Pun not intended. No, 10-1 odds though. So you bet $100 that Gavin Newsom becomes president, and if he becomes president, you win $1,000. I don't think he has that much of a chance at all. You know, I don't think the legacy media, the mainstream media, and the people really the people that are making these odds, they really know what's going on. I think I have a really good vibe of the world and how people think in the collective consciousness. One thing that Patrick Bet David said today, this morning, the first thing I woke up to was a TikTok video of his, and he had a prediction that this 2024 election will be the last election that has any control by the legacy media, by CNN, MSNBC, all the mainstream media. They used to like have so much power in previous presidential elections, but not anymore. In 2028, the power is going to be with the people. The power is going to be with podcasts. The 2028 election is going to be about independent journalists like myself and like Patrick Bet David as well. So that was really refreshing to hear. You know, history is no longer written by the winners, as they say. All right, so Donald Trump is the favorite, 5-4. Joe Biden, 9-4. Nikki Haley, 13-2. Gavin Newsom, 10-1. And then in fourth place, we have Robert Kennedy Jr. with 20-1 odds. Hey, you know, there's been a Kennedy in the White House before. It is possible. I believe he's running as a third party candidate, and he probably won't win, but I assume he'd get as much as the vote as Ross Perot did, probably. It's really hard for a third party candidate to do well in presidential elections, historically speaking, going back more than 100 years. Even the great Teddy Roosevelt wasn't able to win in a third party candidate. And he's on Mount Rushmore. He's one of the most beloved presidents of all time. But after he left the office, he tried to start a third party, and it didn't go successful. It was more successful than most third party candidates, as was Ross Perot. But being a third party candidate, they say it takes a lot of votes from either the left or the right. And that's probably what's going to happen this year. So Robert Kennedy Jr., 20-1 odds. Hey, you bet $100 Robert Kennedy Jr. to win the presidency. If he wins the presidency, you win 2,000. And you know, history does change. So now when people are connected in podcasts and independent journalists do have more say so, I can see why Robert Kennedy Jr. is in fifth place right now for being the next president of the United States. Robert Kennedy Jr. is on just about every podcast. You see him on Tucker Carlson. I think he went on Nelk. You see him on all these different podcasts, and he's an honest person. He admits to any things that he's done, and he's not perfect. And I think that's what people like about him. My favorite candidate is Vivek. Vivek is the smartest, most likable candidate. He's the most honest candidate. And, you know, the mainstream media, the legacy media, they're like scared of him. They're trying to trash him. But he asks the right questions. He's very brave. He's the smartest candidate. And that's who I really support, Vivek. Also, as far as Las Vegas, after Robert Kennedy Jr., Michelle Obama is 25 to 1 odds to win the presidency. She's not even a politician. She's the former husband, or excuse me, wife of a politician. She's 25 to 1 odds to be the president of the United States. There's almost 400 million people in this country. One, two, three, four, five. There's only five people ahead of her to be president, the most powerful person in the world. That's nepotism. That's Michelle Obama marrying right. So that means she married the right person, right? She's ahead of Ron DeSantis, who's next up, 33 to 1 odds. Then the current vice president, Kamala Harris, 40 to 1 odds. Can you believe that? Michelle Obama's 25 to 1 odds to win the presidency. And Kamala Harris has way worse odds, 40 to 1 odds, and she's the freaking vice president. All right, right after Kamala Harris, we have Vivek Ramsey, 50 to 1 odds. You bet $100 on Vivek to win the presidency, and if he wins, you win $5,000. That's pretty good. That's pretty good money. All other candidates listed as 100 to 1 or higher. So I have bet on previous elections. Like I said, the people that voted on Donald Trump in 2016, they didn't get as big as a payoff as you might believe. Granted, the New York Times were saying crazy things like, oh, Hillary Clinton has an 80-90% chance of beating Donald Trump. But Las Vegas was not. Las Vegas made her a favorite, a slight favorite, but not a huge favorite. And I saw that before I went to go listen to the election coverage. I listened to it on the radio in the middle of some woods. And so I was up all night listening to the presidential election, cooking food and under like candlelight and under the stars here in Hawaii. It's actually pretty beautiful. And I was really happy, and I was really happy for Donald Trump. I'm not a huge Trump supporter. I do support, I told you I support Vivek, but I support Donald Trump because of what they're doing to him in this election. And it's just, for them to attack their presidential opponents like that and to imprison them and to make up these bogus charges. And they're attacking the fabric of the Constitution of the United States, including freedom of speech, and um, and that's happening all over the place. And I'd say without hesitation that this current administration is the most corrupt administration in recent years in the United States, and that goes to Hunter Biden having ties to Ukraine and the billions and billions of American tax dollars being sent to Ukraine to support this proxy war against Russia that is not supported by the people in the United States. And you have our infrastructure falling apart. You have 20 million undocumented immigrants crossing the southern border, and Biden is all about saying is all about politics, is all about gender politics, and they're trying to divide people, and they're not and them having so much control over the media, which is slipping. Is and like I said, Patrick Bet David is right. The 2024 election is going to be the last election. Even when big news stories come out, like the Jeffrey E story, they only give you the cookie cutter top part. They're like, oh, Bill Clinton, ooh, wink, wink, or the guy in the wheelchair was at some crazy orgy. Like it's like, oh, but they don't tell you the actual news where, you know, Mr. E had in his relationship with Mrs. Maxwell, and Mrs. Maxwell's father having ties to the Jewish Secret Service, and Epstein being an agent for the the Israeli Secret Service, and Mr. E being an agent for the Israeli Secret Service, and Mr. E having blackmail on very powerful people, politicians in the United States. They're not telling you that part. They're not saying how, why does the United States have such allegiance towards Israel? Anybody that's like I said earlier in the podcast, I have a good scope of like the general feel of what's going on. And anybody that goes on TikTok knows that the majority of people in the United States, they're like supporting Palestine. That's like the heavy supporters. And then when I was outside at some sort, or no, some sort of Palestine Israeli thing, and here in Hawaii, and like they were, the Israeli protesters were outnumbered like 20 to 1 or more, 30 to 1, and there was like this guy that looked like a secret FBI agent or something. He's like, I'm like, wow, they're so outnumbered, and he's like, no, 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 they're not outnumbered. This is just a rare thing. If you look at the statistics, it's actually more Americans support Israel, and it's just like, no, not really the case. But the United States seem to have unwavering support for Israel. And I'm not saying it's because Jeffrey Epstein's and was a secret agent for the Israeli Secret Service and has dirt on American politicians. That's not all of it. It feels like Israel has something else that the American politicians are aware of, that they don't want to piss Israel off and they have to support Israel. And that's where we're at. And if there's a third world war, believe me, Israel is going to be right in the middle of it. So, all right, with that being said, everybody, hope you have a wonderful day. And join me for the next podcast, Mr. G Hawaii podcast, available wherever you listen to your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, Audacity Podcasts. And also take a listen and share it with your friend too. I enjoy doing these, and I'm glad that you listen. Have a nice day.